This is Totally Biased Reviews, and I'm Asha Dore. Today I'm here talking with Julia Phillips. Julia Phillips is the author of the best-selling novels Bear and Disappearing Earth, which was a finalist for the National Book Award and one of the New York Times Book Review's 10 Best Books of the Year. But today we're talking about her new novel Bear, which is set in the San Juan Islands off the coast of Washington, just a ferry ride away from Seattle. I'm glad
It's so nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
I didn't know that your book was about the San Juans until I read it, and I live in
Yeah.
Seattle and have spent a bunch
Oh
of
my gosh, how perfect.
yeah. It's so funny because the first time I went to Orcas, I went hiking with my husband and afraid of bears the whole time because I grew up in the South. He made fun of me so hardcore because he was like,
Yeah,
why would you like there was never been a bear here?
that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Although the past couple of years, they've black bear has been like, twice.
I really loved it and I was really excited because when I take the ferries, I'm always thinking about what it's like for the
Yeah,
people who live there and work there. So it's just really nice to read a story about this place that I think
I'm so
is
happy.
Oprah has a house on Orcas supposedly. So,
Yeah.
it's like everybody has this vacation idea of these little places. It's really nice to read about people who might live there. What was one of your favorite scenes to write or one that you just really love?
So if folks haven't read the book before, this book, Bear, is a novel about two sisters who live on this gorgeous island, San Juan Island, tourist destination, but they're born and raised there and they're not having a great time there. They take care of their mom who's sick. They are having trouble making ends meet. They're kind of waiting for the day their lives are going to change. And then their lives do change when this bear shows up on their front door and they have these really divergent reactions to the bear. And seeing it and interacting with it sends them off in these directions they never thought they would go. So there's a scene in the book where the sisters are having an argument, and they're having an argument inside a car. Um, and it's like getting physical. They're so upset with each other. One is trying to hit the other one. And I always love writing physicality. I love writing the body and that kind of like physical grounded detail. And I thought it was so fun to write this scene of such emotional intensity in such a close, they're in a box together basically. They're really, really trapped in this tiny space and they've got their seatbelts on and it's like pulling them back and I loved writing that scene. I thought it was so fun and fun to choreograph in my head.
Our Lit Mag is attached to a playwriting and production company. I can totally relate because I feel like any scenes that bring you into the body, where you can like imagine people interacting in that way,
Yeah.
are so fun. I love that scene. It was so intense. Do you have anything that you want to say about the way you organize the book or the writing process of like finding your way through this story?
This story was unlike any writing process I've ever had before, and then it just kind of like erupted out. It was um it really I think wanted to come out in a certain way in and the writing was really fast. And then of course in the revision, like a lot had to be thrown out and started over but it really, really wanted to be a certain form, I think. And so there wasn't a lot of decision making on my end about that. It was kind of just following the story's lead. When I think about mm, writing structure in general, or like what to keep on the page and what not to keep on the page, I always try to go back to what does the character want? What does the character want? Thinking about their desire, their goal as a narrative engine, and always going back to that core impulse and using that to direct the next action. So there's, many different ideas that the characters have, many different strategies they have, but they really like have this one core mission that is fueling them forward.
And then are there any scenes or any like darlings that you had to kill that you kind of are just like, oof, really didn't want to cut that one?
There were characterizations that I worked on like really until late in the game and had to kind of throw out scenes and then rewrite scenes or reconceptualize scenes or characters in order to really like fine tune what that person was like. And I feel like the oof really didn't want to cut that. Wasn't like, oh, I'm killing a darling, but it was like, oh man, I haven't got it right again. Like I gotta try again. I gotta do this over again. Oh man, like when am I gonna get to the right place? Um, it was the kind of like the bummer of the process in that way. But that bummer of the process is always kind of overshadowed, at least in memory, by the thrill of getting closer and closer each time. Um, so when I look back at when it was discarded, I feel like, great, thank goodness, thank goodness. If it wasn't working, it wasn't working. And it's hard to feel darling about it then.
Totally fair. And that hunting process is super fun. In your words, why should people read it?
I think it is immersive and propulsive and strange. And I think quite unlike perhaps other things you've picked up, it's a very odd, intense story. It's short, which I think is always a great appeal for a book. It goes down easily, at least in my mind. Like it is. Um, I tried to write a page turner, and I hope that is people's experience of it. That you get in and you do this sort of like intense, thrilling, odd dive into this situation that's bizarre. Why should they read it? I think you should read it for pleasure, for that pleasure, and also read it because it I think it's important to be plucked out of our lives and taken into another wider, wilder world sometimes. I think that this book does that. It brings you the characters are brought out of their everyday, which for them has been quite monotonous and difficult, into a very unpredictable and bizarre situation. And I think we all need a bit of that and more of it than we have. However much we have in our lives, I think it feels good to have a little bit more.
Hmm. I agree with you. I think that it's immersive is a really good word. It's like this place that very few people probably even know about unless you live in Seattle. And then even people in Seattle often don't know that much about the San Juan Islands. It's such a particular place. Like every time we take the ferry across, we always talk about how the ferry ride itself is part of the visit. It's
Mm,
like this
yeah,
really long, I have no idea how long it is, actually. Like it's
yeah,
an
yeah,
hour. Um, and like, if you live in Seattle, you have to drive quite far to get to Anacortes and then take
yeah,
a ferry over to these islands. And for people listening, there are all these like amazing little kind of, I don't even know what they're called, little tiny islands, little hills that are coming up out of
yeah,
the
yeah,
water. And it's like, it looks almost like there are these sleeping dinosaurs all around you.
yeah, totally. So
And
beautiful.
yeah, and it's like to read a book that brings you to this place that is otherworldly already, kind of otherworldly situation, a really unexpected situation for that place, especially during the pandemic. There's just this feeling of like wilderness and isolation, or well,
Mm,
mostly after the pandemic, but there's that pandemic isolation, I think, that is like
yeah.
feeding into the mood of the book. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, to me, there is. I think of it not as a pandemic book in terms of like they're not washing their hands and double masking and
Mhm.
sanitizing their mail, but it's definitely the vibes are very like we've just come out of an experience that was so difficult and it made things that were already challenging so much more challenging, and we're not 100% yet. We're not feeling great. We're not feeling great. I think it has very much that vibe, which was certainly my 2021, 2022 feeling about how we were all doing.
What kind of time have you spent in the San Juan Islands? Have you lived there? Did you stay there for a long time?
I spent some time there researching in the San Juans, and I spent some time also on Whidbey. Both of those things were after I started this manuscript. So when I began this book, I picked the San Juans not because I'd been there, but because I really wanted to go there. And it was a thrill to begin writing this, and then have that as the reason to go. It was wonderful.
That's amazing. Call it a modern day fairy tale. Did you have any like particular experience when you first rode the ferry?
Getting to be on the ferry was fantastic because the particular challenges of being in a place that's only accessible by boat, or I guess by airplane, if that is your budget, but that was not my budget. it was I think it's one thing to think about, theoretically or intellectually, and it's another thing to feel. Like I I remember during the period I was there, I was going through some medical stuff, and I had to go to the pharmacy in Anacortes, and that turned out to be, a 6-hour trip, like between waiting for the ferry, getting on the ferry, getting to Anacortes, walking to the pharmacy, walking back, waiting for the ferry again, getting back on. It was just like such a tedious path and beautiful too. So beautiful to go through that channel. But the particular challenges of it, of course, can like really only be felt if you're there yourself, like experiencing that with your own body. So that was really, really wonderful to be there and to feel taste a little bit of those frustrations and that excitement of actually getting to be in this beautiful space.
Yeah, yeah, I bet. That reminds me of some conversations I've had with people there because every time I go, I end up just like talking to people, which is something that I love
Mhm.
about, people who live on the coast, people who live in small towns, people who live on islands. It's just so much easier to have conversations than in cities. I'm from like
Mm,
small towns, so living in Seattle is very different for me.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but one thing that people seem to consistently communicate who live on these islands, at least in my experience, is that like Anacortes is sort of the big city. They're like you're like a city person. I once told someone that I lived near Edmonds, which is a fairly small town outside of Seattle, and she was like, "Oh, you have everything there." And I just thought like, "Wow, like yeah, that
But you do have everything there.
yeah."
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, what a
yeah.
thing.
And it's remarkable. I think to live on an island in particular, um, it has its benefits and its challenges, and absolutely the necessary limitations on like what is there, what can be there. You have only so much space, and you are not actively connected to it. It's not like you're gonna hop in your car and drive over to the next town. Like that's not going to happen. So you really have to make choices about like what you need to live with and what you are not going to live with. It's incredible and fascinating, and a very exciting setting, I think, for fiction or nonfiction.
I totally agree. And the main character struggles a lot, I think, with this idea of leaving, which is really
Mhm.
interesting because she works on the ferry, so she's leaving all the time. But
Right.
like also just there's this thing of being kind of stuck on the island, which I can really relate to. I think that that's sort of like the small town,
Mhm.
the biggest small town struggle or the most consistent is just feeling like the place that you live is a little bit of like a black hole that just keeps sucking you back in. And I
Yeah,
found her struggle to be very relatable and intense.
that makes me really happy to hear that it resonated. And when I was talking before about like what the main character wants, what each character wants, that is absolutely her. That's her mission to leave.
Mhm.
She just wants to leave so badly. I wonder, that was certainly my own experience growing up in the town where I grew up. And also, I wonder if it's something to do like with, at least in our society, like or in the US, I think there's often for a lot of folks an idea about leaving your childhood home, wherever it is, no matter like where, whatever the size or situation, leaving that you have to like get away from that place where you were a child in order to become an adult, um, or like put some distance between who you are now and the person that you were then. And she has not been able to do that. She's still living in not only in the town where she grew up, but also in her mother's house where she grew up, like with her sister. And I think she's really struggling with that too. There's a kind of she feels like a kind of arrested development or a stuckness that still sleeping in her childhood bedroom. Like she's still very, very uh, kept in place the way that she was before.
That really shows through, and I think that you're right. It's kind of like little hero's journey we all have to have.
Maybe we all dream of having.
Yeah.
We're told that we ought to have.
The idea of her mother's house, which was also her grandmother's house. I feel like there's also kind of a struggle with we have this thing, it's supposed to be special. It's a house. Some people don't have a house, and I think that
Yeah.
comes through really well too. But it's like, but I don't want to be at the house. It's like you
Yes.
want to let it go, but you don't want to be there either.
So much of the book and the story is about class tensions and money and the feeling of like what opportunities money can bring or the lack of money can limit. And she is her family's in an interesting position because they have more than lots of other people. So they have more than qualifies them for social services or a variety of different supports, but they don't have enough to make their life livable in a way. They have a lot of consumer and medical debt. Um, they're really struggling to create a life, and they really feel kind of lost in the gap, slipping through the cracks that are enormous in this country.
Yeah, I really appreciated the details about money. There's a point when a $50 item is like a huge barrier
Huge.
that's really true. And I think that a lot of people in this country, well, a lot of people I think have that experience. And then also
Mhm.
a lot of people would think that that experience is not real. And so I think it's just really, it's nice to read about it and to be reminded that, you know, this kind of like a $50 charge can change everything. I mean, it's like it
Yeah.
can be this or a, couple $100 ticket can just tank you and send you back into, 6 months ago financially,
Yeah.
which is a really stressful place to be. And it really increases the tension, I think, of the book. Everywhere people turn, money is the problem.
Yeah, and she's in a very, as you said, like she's in a very wealthy tourist destination uh, setting where a lot of people around her have an extraordinary amount of freedom because of their money, and she and her family are just not able to access that, but they're confronted with it all the time.
Mhm.
um, and I think it creates a lot of tension for her. I think she feels very, very, very uh, it's not a situation. She's in this main character is in her late 20s, both she and her sister in their late 20s. And I think our focus character, like Sam, this younger sister, has not reached a point in her life where she's like, "Oh, this is just the way it is. Like it is what it is, and I accept it." I think she feels really actively frustrated and embittered by like the new indignities and limitations that every single day brings. It's so so infuriating to her, and she really wants things to be different.
There are very few books that actually expose women's anger and frustration as a really, really valid thing. Usually it's just ignored. It's just left out of stories. And she has a really good reason to be upset. We don't get to read about that very much. It's just so relatable to me too, because I grew up in a tourist area. I had this thing in high school. I was like, we live in a place that's someone else's vacation.
Are you from Florida originally?
Yeah, I'm from Pensacola. It's like a little
Yeah,
tourist town.
yeah,
But my husband's from the
yeah,
Dominican Republic, and I don't think there's
yeah.
anywhere, many places in the world that are as people are super, super low income and
Yes,
tourists are super, it's everywhere.
yeah.
So it's a really important story, I think, because it is a really, really common experience
Hmm.
anywhere that we go, especially now that housing prices are extraordinarily high and vacation is
Hmm.
everybody's favorite thing because of the pandemic. It's like highlighting an
Hmm.
experience that I think is so important.
I think this is my second book, and I felt really strong with the first one that the message of that book is that connection can save us, community can save us. That coming together with other people and sharing what you know and listening to them kind of in that book there's a mystery, and that's like how the mystery is addressed. um and I really wanted to argue for the power of community. This project was kind of a flip side of the same coin where to me argument of the book, the moral, so to speak, of the story is that disconnection destroys us. And I think that this main character, as you said, has a lot of good reasons to be upset. She should be upset. It's a very upsetting situation. And also, she makes a lot of choices in her anger and frustration to isolate herself, pretty actively isolate herself. And those choices have consequences that are really painful beyond she ever imagined. I would love it for folks to take away from reading this story, like, all of this is true, the world sucks and is unfair, in a million different ways. And also the only chance we have of getting through it is trying to connect with each other and just trying to be with each other and like not cutting ourselves off from from other people, but reaching out for other people even when it's painful and even when it's tough and even when you're like, well, I've been rejected before, so how could this work? Just to keep trying, keep trying, keep trying because it matters so much.
I love that. When you were on the San Juans, did anybody ever talk to you about the spirit of the island?
I want to hear right now.
Yeah, yeah, there's something about at the different islands, they all have different things to say about it that in my experience, but I've been more on orcas than anywhere else and but they say that the island will either keep you or kick you out. There's no in
Mm,
between. People are like, yeah, this person came here, but the island didn't want them, so they left.
mm.
The idea of being kept by a place or rejected
Yeah,
from,
that's fascinating.
right?
Yeah, it really makes me think about these characters actually. Yeah.
God, I just love the setting so much. I feel like it's almost this character. And then there's also, of course, the bear.
There's very much actually a bear.
And everybody, I think you should read this for so many reasons. The bear parts are really thrilling.
That makes me really happy because I really like them too. They were a thrill to write and I do love this animal.
There's a part in the book where you talk about different famous stories of people interacting with wild animals and how that didn't go so well. And
Yeah.
I find those stories to be fascinating. It must have been really fun to research that stuff.
It was very fun and interesting and also like brutal and reality shaking and scary. I mean, like we are human animals and we of course have a relationship with the animals around us and the natural world around us that try as we might to recast ourselves as some different um order of being, like we are of the world and in the world, and relationships with animals is like it's the natural order of things like this. And also, oh my gosh, that relationship can go very wrong, and have really horrific consequences, as in many of these famous stories.
Toward the end of the book, I was sitting with my dog. He's like very attached to me. He follows me all over the place.
Yeah,
He's like this giant pit bull mix. And I was just
yeah,
looking at him and thinking like it is so interesting how safe we feel
yeah.
in relationship to these, large-toothed predator beings.
That's a wolf. It's a wolf in your house. Like
Yeah.
like that's an apex predator.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's this comedian I really really love, Maria Bamford, and she has an old comedy sketch where she's talking like in the voice of her dog, who's like a little pug mix, or something. And the dog is saying like she's saying like, "Oh, I'm so sorry for," Maria is the comedian is talking to this dog and expressing her regrets in their relationship. And the dog is like, "Oh, like don't worry about me. And, just so you know, if you died, it would be 40 minutes before I began to consume your body." Like really just like, oh, it's all well and good, the relationship we have with each other, but like I would eat you and I will if given the opportunity. Very, very funny.
So easy for us to forget, especially with cats. I feel like cats have like not
Oh
left
yeah.
that world at all. Like,
No, they're just tiny, tiny panthers in your house.
yeah, yeah. Like I don't have cats. I grew up with cats, but we had a neighborhood cat when my kids were really little who would like hide on our gutter between our gutter and our roof and pounce on us as
Hmm.
we left the house.
God.
And I mean,
Oh,
really at like 5:30 in the morning, it's really not what you want
yeah.
is tiny panther like
No.
attacking.
Yeah. Claws in. Oh boy. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
I'm just
that's
like,
not fun.
yeah, and it's like, and I always thought it's a good thing I only have a bunch of scratches on my shoulder, like that you're so tiny. Because, like, if you were big,
Yeah, totally.
you'd be goners. We have so much arrogance about our ability to control animals. It's wild.
Yeah, and I think that arrogance increases with, well, I guess there's a complacency that comes if you're in like constant exposure to animals, but also there's an arrogance that comes out of not being exposed to. Like when you're not around that animal, then you just sort of imagine, oh, what's that? There was like some poll going around a couple years ago that said like 85% of Americans think that they could like um, beat a grizzly bear in a fight or something, or like,
Wow.
it was very we imagine ourselves, I think, more powerful when we don't actually confront that animal. When it's like just something we see in our imagination, we're like, oh yeah, I got that, I could do
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's funny. So I haven't read an interview or seen an interview where anybody has brought this up. So tell me
Mm,
if I have, but I feel like the pandemic,
okay.
at least for me, was like at least very early on, sort of defined by Tiger King.
Oh, oh, how funny, how
Yeah,
funny. No, you're the first person to bring that up. Yeah,
but
Tiger King and Bear Queen. Yeah, totally.
right,
Yeah.
right. I think this book aligned so well with the pandemic for me because it was just like another example of people sort of not behaving that well when a wild animal is around them.
The hubris of humanity,
Yeah.
totally. One of the wonderful things, many, many wonderful things about the book coming out in the world is that, it gets like shared with other folks. And before the book is actually published, the publisher shares it with booksellers, which is thrilling. And then you get some bookseller responses, which is like, as like a book kid, like, isn't this a dream to be able to be in conversation with these folks? And we got a couple pieces of feedback from booksellers in Montana. And it was fabulous because every single bookseller in Montana was like, that we, got this like, oh, really love this story, like love this. And like, it's just very important that people know that this is not how you behave around a bear. Like this is not bear aware. Like this is not what you should be doing. And I loved it. I absolutely, it was so perfect that the
Mhm.
folks who are actually, coming into contact regularly are saying like, no, 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 don't, do not do this. But the sisters are not coming into contact regularly before this, and they have their own ideas about how to proceed.
Yeah, yeah. And I think they do the kinds of things that a lot of people do. I think a lot of, problems that happen with wild animals are because people think that they're having some magical connection or
Yeah,
something, and that animal is in some way,
yeah,
part of their world differently than everyone else. It's like we get into this
yes.
space where we feel very special. And then
Oh yeah. Listen, I've been there. Yeah, totally.
the Tiger King thing like hit me early on. I was reading it. I was like, why does this feel so right? And I was like, might just be me. I lived in
I
Seattle.
love that.
We like shut down early, like, and
Yeah,
so did the San Juans. They shut down really early in the
yeah,
pandemic, because we were the
yeah,
first place that had
yeah.
cases. And then Tiger King came out and we all watched it at the same time in Seattle, you know. Um,
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely. What a time that was. Jesus.
right. And you had a baby during that time period, right?
Yeah, I did. I had my first kid in June 2020.
Oh
Um,
my gosh, your
yeah, it
first.
was pretty intense.
Yeah.
I gotta say, it was pretty intense. I when I first started like going out with the book, that was of course, and I mean you can see it in the book, like the kind of way that like domestic caretaking or the like kind of simultaneous trap and love of the household, or the interaction with the medical system or health insurance, or the way that money works in the book is all like of course totally influenced by these experiences of um, pregnancy and postpartum, and having this baby in my own life in this very, very challenging and intense situation. But when the book was coming out and I first started to talk about this with folks, I was like, I really had to kind of like pull back in the intensity with which I talked about it, because I was like, it was like a hellscape. It was like a nightmare, an unceasing nightmare, I would say.
That's
You ever
fair.
feel like you're living in hell and every day is hell and you can't get out? Like, it was a very challenging time.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, it's already hard when you're like my
Oh,
first baby
yeah.
was born during like the H1N1 scare in 2010.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So it was like
Oh my gosh, yeah.
brief, but we were not allowed to go to the hospital and stuff with a baby.
Oh
So, like
my gosh.
so like I can't even imagine. I mean, like times 1,000 having a baby during the pandemic and not being able to have people visit you when
Oh, yeah.
anything happens. I
Yeah,
mean,
no one can touch the baby, no one can get near the baby, and, like, every I had postpartum anxiety really bad, and, like, every there was no, like, sanity check. There was no one who was sane at the time, so every, like, feeling that I had that was out of anxiety, like, oh, no one can like breathe the same air that the baby is breathing, otherwise the baby will die. And like, if I take the baby outside, I'm killing the baby. That is like, I am murdering the baby. I feel very, very strongly that I was killing the baby. And I think, I hope in a different time, there would be some kind of check on that experience.
mhm.
And instead, everyone was like, "You are killing the baby." You know what I mean? Like if you are, if yes, if somebody like stands within 10 feet or 20 feet of that child will die because like
Mm.
this was again, this was we had no idea. This was like pre. Medical workers were wearing masks. We were like wearing bandanas. Like This was so. We had no idea what was going on. Everyone was so frightened. And it was just like a very, very un unsane,
Yeah,
insane time.
I can
Yeah.
imagine. I can imagine. You're right. There were no checks, and I had postpartum OCD, and I barely had
Oh
checks.
my
Because
god.
like when you have
Yeah.
that thing where you're like irrationally, this thing will kill my child if I do it.
Yes.
Then
Yes.
it's a lot easier for someone to say, actually, you don't have to hide all the knives from yourself because they're not
Right.
randomly fly from the counter to your child across the room. That's irrational.
Right. And then they say that and
Pandemic.
you're like, I think you're not perceiving that they actually will. Like it's
Yeah.
all very well and good for you to say that, but like I have a very strongly like I have a conviction in my soul and it is that they will. So you're
Yeah.
just not getting it.
Yeah. But then the
Oh
pandemic, it's
boy.
like people are like, actually, all of these little tiny knives that you can't see are definitely going to fly at your
Right. Knives everywhere. Yeah, it was a very knives everywhere experience. I mean, and it's so interesting because all of us were going through so much so differently. And I mean, like I feel like the folks, at least in like that world of early parenthood, pandemic parenthood for me, like the people who had a kid in April 2020 had a radically different experience than I did in June, had a radically different experience from the folks who were having a kid in November, or like the people who had toddlers, or the people who didn't have, had like were living alone in their apartments. Like the intense, horrific isolation of it. Or some people had I mean, like my best friend was in Florida and her experience was so different and so much more connection with community, like so much more. She was like having a normal life. And
Mhm.
it was just everyone's experience was so, so different and so bizarre in 1,000 different reasons. So so in this book, I wanted to capture some of like the bizarreness, the fallout from the bizarreness, rather than the particularities of these characters had their very own experience in the pandemic that was around their like living in a tourist economy, working in service jobs where the bottom drops out, kind of having a mom who's sick with a lung disease. Like this was a very different experience for them. But I really wanted to try to tap into that kind of unprecedented and weird feeling for them.
Yeah, yeah, I can see how your experiences, the world's experiences, and all that led to this story. There's really like a straight line from like feeling like you live in a hellscape and there's nobody to check
Yeah.
your reality
You
to,
cannot get out of your house.
yeah, to being like in a place surrounded by water where you're,
Yeah.
even if your job takes you away from that place, literally like every single day that you work, which is a lot of
Yeah,
days,
but then it just, like, brings you
you
right
back.
back over
Yeah.
and over and over again.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
yep. There's nothing drab, pandemic drab about the book. The pandemic is referenced, brief little scenes give, like, touch points to the pandemic, but it's not like you said, it's not like we're washing our hands for 20 seconds or whatever, and
Right.
over.
Singing happy birthday while we it
Yeah.
was funny, I was talking to a guy the other day, another writer, and he was talking about writing, a book with, like, the pandemic in the background, and he was like, "I think my impulse at this moment would be, like, for the next thing I write to kind of pluck the pandemic out of there and not have it in there at all."
Mhm.
And I was like, "Oh." And I was like, "Could you, um, like, do you feel that you can, like" I fucking wish, you know what I mean? Like, I fucking wish I could, like, pluck that experience out of me and not and be like, "Let me just, like, pick it on out, and, like, I got it all out, clean edges, like, there's nothing and now I can just proceed as if that never happened." But, like, that has not been my experience of being in the world today in 2024 is, very interwoven with, like, these past few years and what we've gone through all together. And there's no plucking it out. Like, this is part of the weave of the fabric now, this is, like, part of the way I interact with people or the way I go around or, like, the kind of feelings I have or fears I have or hopes I have are, like, very, very, very threaded through with this experience that we all just went through.
Yeah, like, it's like that, what is that game, Operation? Like, it makes me think of the
Mhm,
game, like, if he can do that, like, I am so jealous. I mean,
mhm.
I had a therapist a
Love
long
that.
time ago. We were like talking about like my father died when I was a kid, and I was asking her, I'm like, is there any way, like I feel okay about it. Is there any way that I could just kind of do that, kind of pluck it out and be like, oh, that's a thing that happened. I dealt with it.
Right.
Now I'm gonna continue on
There's
without
no more, like, ripples coming
yeah,
from it in my life. Yeah, this is
yeah.
just, like,
Yeah, but like,
yeah,
but will it always kind of like the ferry boat bring me back?
yeah,
And she was like,
yeah,
yeah, it will always bring you back. You're never going to be able to pluck it out. So like, this is you now. You've got you've got to just
yeah.
be the person who has these.
God damn it, yes.
Yeah.
Just the hard truths of therapy. Yeah,
Right.
totally.
But sometimes I wonder if pandemic was particularly hard for people whose family members got sick or who had to be the main caretakers because it's just like
Mm,
it was impossible to actually take care of people because you didn't weren't in control of the things that could happen to
yes.
them. And I just wonder if
Oh, wow, yeah, that puts it really well. Taking on this role of caretaker, but you cannot take care. I also think so much about I mean, and this is about disconnection too, but, like, the experience of loneliness. The degree of isolation that some folks experienced, I think was, like,
yeah.
changes our very fabric. That is just
True.
beyond.
Yeah, you can't pluck it out. Or if you can, good
You
for you.
can't pluck it
But
or
some
if you can, I wanna read that book because that sounds awesome. Like, that's the fantasy in which I wanna live.
like I think about your characters because I feel like they have like both things that we're talking about. They're like taking
Mm,
care of someone, trying to take care of each other, but they're also
yeah.
people who are not in like a strong romantic relationship.
Mhm.
Their relationship as sisters is really with each other.
Yes.
But there's, like, a certain aloneness that seems like was natural
Yes.
for them, but then kind of forced on them, and then that contending with that seems to be a big part of the
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, they, like, can pull themselves apart from other people just as part of their personalities, and then it becomes it's such a weight to carry, the weight of that distance or that loneliness. Very I think they're really feeling that. And I think the sister who is more drawn to the bear, I think is doing that in part because it kind of blots out everything that we're talking about. Like, the being around this bear is such a intense and dangerous and exciting experience that it puts out all those kind of thoughts of, like, everything that came before, the way that this is my personality. I feel lonely. I feel isolated. I feel worried, I feel responsible, like, she can't think about any of those things because she's thinking like, "I'm with a fucking bear." Like, that kind of takes everything else over,
Yeah.
um, which is a very appealing state of mind, I think, and makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
to the wild among us, I guess.
Totally. Well, and she's, she's sort of the caretaker of the between the
Yeah.
two sisters, and I'm the oldest child, so I thought about her
Mhm.
a lot because,
Yes.
the oldest child, I was a single mom during the pandemic, and
Yeah.
and my kids have disabilities, so
Oh, boy.
I was thinking
Oh, fuck.
about it, this like there's this point for me, I think it was like 2022 maybe, where like I
Yes.
went on a little trip to Portland,
Yeah.
and I just thought like, what if I just don't stop driving? And it's not
Yes.
like I wanted to leave anything really, but it was just like, what if I just do something totally nuts that's like out of character
Yes.
that I would never do? And that's not as intense as like interacting with a bear, but it was, you
No,
know,
but it is. It's the
yeah.
same. I think it's the same exact feeling. And I think it's the same exact feeling in kind of the same exact moment of being like, okay, well, I couldn't even like, you know, here I am solo caretaking for these kids, like every single day. You're like, not the opportunity to just get in a car and start driving, like, isn't even there. You're like, you are just like the responsibility is so all consuming,
Hmm.
and then you get that, and then you're alone in a car by yourself a couple years later, and you're like, "Oh, shit. Like,
Yeah.
I could do anything." Can do anything.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's all this when the opportunity comes, I don't know what person would be sitting there and not have the thought go through their mind of like,
Hmm.
"Wow, like, I could. All of a sudden, I could."
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really like it's something that I think most people until they've had that experience might be like, I'd never go there. But like the
Oh,
urge to do
please.
something wrong or irresponsible or dangerous when you have
Yeah.
been giving to other people for like a very long time is such
Yeah.
a real, weirdly thrilling thing. It's just like I actually could do something bad. And just knowing,
If
yeah.
people had none of that inside them, like, there would not be any, uh, alcohol ever sold in stores, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
anyone who's ever had a glass of wine at the end of the day and is just like, "I just wanna take, like, I'm just gonna drink a little bit of poison to take the edge off." Like, come on, like, it's just like I have to believe that all of us have some feeling toward, like, I wanna seek relief through, like, a little bit of obliteration or a little bit of, like, abandonment of who I am or what I have to do. I wanna just escape a little bit. Who doesn't love an escape?
Right, it's like this, I thought, I had hurricanes hit my hometown, and we got kinda trapped there sometimes when I was a kid,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
there's, like, a very vibrant punk community there, and we used to have these conversations, especially after the, like, biggest hurricane, that has ever hit there in 2004, and these conversations were all around, like, all we are trying to do is find autonomy, but when we live in a place that is this limited for options for
yeah,
autonomy, we do
yeah.
weird things. We spray paint buildings, we,
Yes,
tear shit up, we do
yes.
whatever, like we make a sculpture in the park that the officials can't remove or whatever.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
It's like,
Yeah,
and people might be like, well, why would you do that? Why would you interact with a bear? Why would you get in your car and just drive and then drive home? We have to separate from what's expected, I think, in order to feel like
yes,
we have autonomy. To me, it's
yes,
less about escape and more for both Sam and her sister. It's just about
yeah,
where can I find autonomy, and they zero in on
yes,
things.
yes, 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 yes. Like chasing that feeling of freedom, even if it's just temporary, because their lives are so limited in so many ways.
Mhm.
That really is, I gotta say, like the feeling of childhood to me. Feeling of childhood, feeling of teenagehood, like so many other people are in control of every single thing you do. You really like cannot do for yourself. You're not like allowed to do for yourself in so many different ways. And there's so many like natural limitations and like societal limitations, and like and like dreaming of that agency and trying to pursue some yeah, autonomy wherever you can find it is very Listen, in my experience, this is a human trait. This is not like a, you know, abhorrent, like some of us freaks get in the car and think about keep driving. Like this is everybody feels this way at one time or another.
Mhm.
I'm telling myself. If you
Yeah.
if you don't, let us know.
Right? Yeah, I wanna read that book where you're just like, "I
Yeah,
love
totally.
suffering. Suffering is awesome."
Yeah.
It's like
I'm quite constrained and ooh, it feels good. But I mean, like some constraint does feel good, or some like tethering or grounding does feel good. But come on, like everyone wants to take a vacation sometimes, right? Like this is
Mhm. Yeah, and if
feels
you
good.
can't take a vacation, how do you take a vacation? I think,
Exactly.
yeah, it's like to me,
Exactly.
that was kind of like I was like sitting there, I was like, what do I think is one of the, big questions of this book? And I'm like, it's kind of that. It's kind of like everybody else is taking a vacation here. I really fucking need to badly.
Yes.
How can I
Yeah.
if I can't? All the things that happen that, like you said, money could have solved most of the
Oh,
problems in this book, if not all.
yes. Like 99% of what's going on could be solved with money. Yes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's really wild. I mean, even like the bear, like I thought like what if the bear went to Oprah's house? Instead, this would be a really
Right.
different book. It would be like, "Hey, there's a bear at my house," and that would be over in 5 minutes.
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. I think about that too with the book. Like the bear would not it is the relationship that the sisters have to the bear that is keeping the bear hanging around and getting the bear to come closer. Yeah,
Mhm.
and this poor bear that it didn't go to Oprah's house instead. And these poor sisters that it didn't go to
Yeah.
Oprah's house instead. But sorry, Oprah. Okay, well, here's a little section that is at the end of the day. There's a moment where the sisters see it's the first time that they like see the bear together. The bear actually shows up at their front door, and they're really scared. They call the police. Uh, then the bear goes away, and then they're like excited afterwards. This is kind of the afterglow of the first sighting. It was a wonderful day. When Sam got home after work, she and Elena talked through their morning over again. They reminded each other of the details one had forgotten: the long roll of the animal's tongue, the mound at the top of its back, what Sam had blurted out to the police when they first arrived. "What else were you doing all this time?" Elena quoted, delighted at the impropriety. Sam didn't even remember. The deputies' faces had fuzzed into one pale, sandy-haired blot of authority in her mind. She only wanted to talk with Elena about the ferocious thing they'd seen, the dangerous magic they had lived through. In bed that night, Sam took surveys while her thoughts wandered. The floorboards in the hall creaked. Her sister came in and crawled onto the covers beside her. "I can't sleep," Elena whispered. Sam clicked off her screen and nestled down next to her sister. Their mother's room was silent on the other side of the wall. Sam missed her. Sam missed this. The two of them curled up in this bedroom, telling secrets to each other in the dark. Sam said, "I wish we'd gotten better pictures of it." "You should have taken a video." "I will if it comes back." "Ooh," Elena said. They lay there. The long weight of Elena's body held Sam's covers, so she was pinned pleasantly under her sheet, warm and secure. Exhaustion hit her like a blow. Her jaw and eyes ached. Elena kept talking, steady. "I didn't think it was real when I first saw it. I used to have nightmares about that bear." Sam unstuck her mouth. "No, you didn't." "Yes, I did," Elena said. "When we were kids, I'd have dreams that we were outside and a bear or sometimes a wolf would try to get us, and I'd have to save you and Mom." That wasn't true, Sam thought. At least she didn't remember them, these nightmares. She remembered Elena dreaming about sharks. Sharks? Or was it an octopus? Elena was scared even now of deep water, not being able to see her feet under the surface, murkiness. Elena was still talking. It was too much to listen. Swaddled in her sister's voice by the hush of her meaningless words, Sam let herself happily drift. Happy sisters. Happy sisters.
Yay, happy sisters.
Having some snuggles.
Thank you so much. This was
Thank
really
you so
fun.
much for this, Asha. The
Yeah.
best time. And I'm sending you very, very, very best wishes and all my gratitude all the way, in Seattle. How perfect to be talking to you in Washington. That just seems ideal.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you
I'm
so
so
much.
glad.